First of all, welcome everybody. I'm glad that you're taking the time to do this. I have found that the Enneagram, just in general and in life, has been such an amazing tool for me and for the people around me in my life, just in terms of how we navigate this life and those sorts of things. And so taking it into a business context and a business setting is really interesting because we don't all see the world the same way. And it just helps us show up as better human beings and affects our cultures in some pretty incredible ways. So I'm not sure what everyone's background is in terms of the business that you're in. If you're an owner, a CEO, a manager, you're leading a team, you're just trying to learn how to lead up to the people that are over you, et cetera. But this is valuable in all of those contexts and beyond. So first of all, thank you for joining us and having the courage to jump into this, because I think once we get to the end of this, you'll see the value coming on the other side. So I wanted to just first of all introduce myself. My name's Tim Urmston. I have been a CEO of a company called Seek. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Seek for the last 19 years. And just in December of this year, my business was acquired by a larger firm. And so we're in the process of that acquisition and merger and really working well with a company called Directions that bought us out recently, and really excited about that transition. But in doing so, during that transition, one of the things that held our company really tightly together was this assessment, the Enneagram assessment, and really understanding who our people are, what drives them, what motivates them, how we interact with them, how we show up at work with each other, and also understanding the why behind the way that people show up. So it's a really good tool for us, been a really good tool for us. We've had no turnover since the acquisition, which I heard is unheard of. So very excited about the process that this has taken us through and what it's doing. And I would recommend this highly for anyone who's going through an acquisition or a merger of any kind, to kind of get through the rough spots and understand what this looks like. The other thing I'll say is there's also a cultural aspect to this that, companies and entities take on cultures. And so, for example, Directions is a 3 company. They're very 3-like, and Seek is a very sort of 7-4-9 company. And so bringing those two together is like putting together a person that's really driven, numbers oriented, efficient, wants to win, with some folks who want to sit around and talk about their feelings and emotional stuff. And so we're in the process of merging those two, and this is really helping us navigate that process, at least from the Seek side, as we go in. So with that, so my background is that I'm also a 5 Capitals client, and so it's important that you know that as well, and that's where this came from. I also have, so 5 Capitals, Brandon Schaefer has been instrumental in coaching me through a lot of this stuff, as well as I have a friend, Christy Kennedy, who is from Culture Conscience, who has been a very vocal consultant for me as well through this whole thing, teaching me a lot about the Enneagram. So both of those, and I'll mention them at the end of this as we go through. So with that, I'd love to jump in, and hopefully you'll get something out of this and really walk away with some good information. And if nothing else, just understanding yourself as we go through. So the Enneagram, really briefly overview, hopefully you know a little bit about it before we go in, but I don't want to presume that. So the Enneagram is a tool that basically no one owns. It's been around for thousands of years. No one really knows where it's come from. There's a lot of different schools of thought of things like the Sufi tradition, esoteric Christianity, Pythagorean theorem, et cetera, et cetera. So, but the bottom line is no one really knows where it comes from, but it's been a great tool throughout the years, and people have captured it and tried to, bring it into the marketplace. And that's what we're talking about today. So why is this critical to business? So think about it this way. In your office, you have 9 different types of people with nuances and approaches that are different than yours. And we need to know how to show up in life and in the office. And so the one thing I want you to take away from this whole thing is the number one predictor of success and the biggest factor in what makes a great leader is self-awareness. And whether you're doing a Myers-Briggs or a DISC or the Enneagram like we're talking about today, these are all powerful tools. The reason I like the Enneagram is because it does delve into the why. It gets a little bit behind the scenes and behind the curtain and talks a little bit about the why and the nuances behind that. So, um, the other thing is, don't assume everyone else sees the world the way you see it. I need to know how to negotiate in this moment with whoever it is that I'm negotiating with, so that we can create win-wins and honor my teammates in the process. We had two project managers on our team that were sort of butting heads before we did the Enneagram. After the Enneagram, they became very good friends and ended up going on vacation and things together, which was interesting. So how do I lead my team effectively, and how can I lead effectively up and down? I think that's really important. So a lot of times we talk a lot about how do we lead the people under us, but sometimes we need to be able to lead up. And if you don't understand how your leader sees the world, it's really hard to connect. And so this gives you a way to connect with that. How do I motivate my people and my team? It will dramatically decrease tension in the office and dramatically decrease turnover. You'll find yourself with people not leaving as quickly as they would otherwise, because people want to be known in the marketplace. It's no longer show up, work, and leave. It's I want to be known. I want to have friends at work. I want people who know me at work. Jody Halpern, is a friend of Seek, said, the natural function of emotion is to communicate my condition to another person. When I'm able to do that, I trust that person. I can go on with getting my needs taken care of. And so this gives you a tool to build trust with other people. And then each type's attention leans towards something different. And this determines what you miss, which is really interesting. They might be leaning in towards something that's not what you lean in towards. And if you know those things, it gives you a really powerful tool on how to connect and how to motivate and do those things. So that's a little bit of background of why this is important to business. So I'm going to fly through these because we only have an hour, and we need to get at it. So a couple things just about this. There are 3 centers of intelligence that we talk about a lot in this. The 8s, 9s, and 1s are in the action center. The 2s, 3s, and 4s are in the feeling center, and the 5s, 6s, and 7s are in the thinking center. And another way to think about this is head, heart, and gut. And so when you start thinking about it from that perspective, it's not only do I know what you know, I feel what you feel, and I'm compelled to act on your behalf. There, depending on what type you are, you have a default that leads you to, so if you're in the thinking center, it's going to lead you to your head. It's going to lead you to, approach everything through the lens of logic, reason, and information, okay? And so, but if it drops to the chest and the heart, in the feeling center, it goes to the, you lead with emotion. The way that you perceive the world is through an emotional lens. What does it feel like? What am I feeling right now? How do I sit with this and reconcile this? Relationships, purpose are driven really heavily in this center. And then the action center is all about instinct, right? It's about, I don't necessarily think too much about it, nor do I feel too much about it. My default is to just act. So you can see a lot of action or even reaction in this center. And so our goal is, even if somebody lives in an action center or a thinking center, we want to sort of up the integration on some of these other centers of intelligence, so that they're a little bit more balanced when it comes to their approach of things. And if you can tap into those things, you can relate to people a lot better going through that. So let me introduce you to each type. We're going to do a little bit of a round robin. And as I said, this is going to go fairly quickly. But I want to make sure that we touch on this, and we will stop after each one and just see if there are any questions that are coming from the group as we go through. So let's start with the 1. The 1 is called the perfectionist, and you'll see there's some letters and numbers up here. Basically, what this is the makeup of what a 1, sort of how they sit on the Enneagram. And so their core is a 1. They have a wing of a 9 or a 2. So you hear a little bit about wings. The 9 towards their left, and the 2 towards their right. 7 is where they go when they're relaxed, and 4 is where they go when they're stressed. We don't have time to talk about all that, but just understand that's what those lines mean there. So you can see where the lines go from who they are. So an overview of the 1. So they're called the perfectionist. A lot of traits. They're principled, they're objective, they're ethical, they're hardworking, structured, reliable. conscientious, quality-minded. These are people who see the world in black and white a lot of times. They see this is right and this is wrong, and never the twain shall meet. You don't see a lot of gray area with these folks. Now, the more integrated they are, meaning the more mature they are, the more healthy they are, they sort of elevate to some spaces where they can see the gray and they can relate to people who live in that space. But typically their default is again at that one level that we're talking about. Their motivation is the need to perfect themselves, others, in the world. So if you think about it, we like to call these folks the reformer, but I also like to call them the improver. These are folks who can see something and see how it can be better. And they always see things that way. They look around and they go, I think this could be better. I think this could be better. And so that's where the perfectionism comes from. When they are healthy, they're the improvers. They have an eye for how to make things better, more effective, develop stronger. They do this with projects and people. So they can be very effective at calling out better things in people just as much as they can in terms of developing strategies around making projects more healthy and doing that. These are folks that you want to be accountants and lawyers and people who need to pay attention to detail because they're very detailed in regards to the way they approach this. And if they're healthy, they become a very effective partner in your business because they can keep an eye on things and make sure that everything is up and up. We had a bookkeeper at our business for years, and by far she was the best financial person that we had in our company because she was a one. And she kept us honest and she kept us organized and she made sure we weren't spending money where we shouldn't spend money and et cetera, et cetera. So very effective in terms of growing a healthy company. On the unhealthy side, they can become micromanagers, perfectionists, in some ways procrastinators, but not procrastinators because they're lazy, but procrastinators because they're sort of tortured with it's never done. So a lot of times they can be seen as rigid or potentially religious around things if they're unhealthy. So they're not integrated. They're sort of at that first low level integration. And they're much harder on themselves than they are of others, but they're still hard on others as well if they're unhealthy. So always looking for what's wrong. And so what I thought from a business perspective is to go through some of these do's and don'ts. I won't go through all of them, but because you can read some of them, but as improvers. So ask them to look over things that are in a draft form and look for opportunities to improve those things. They're fantastic at that. Give them deadlines because as perfectionists, again, their work is never done, but if you give them a deadline, they will meet it and it'll have to be done. And so a lot of times I tell my ones, 80% is good enough and perfection is the enemy of great. And so it's a good way to sort of lead them into that. Be direct and sincere in your feedback, not passive aggressive and it's a really interesting thing. Implied criticism is taken as personally as direct criticism, but it's harder to resolve. And what I mean by that is that, when they sense the passive aggressive, their mind becomes a wonderland of all kinds of things that they could start creating things in their head that they shouldn't. So, because the direct communication isn't there. Absence of communication sort of leaves the mind to wonder, becomes like a bad neighborhood. So find ways to help them feel in control of the outcome. So if you can help them sort of get their feet under them and feel good about where they're at, that's always a good thing. And also remind them of the impact they're having on the project or how it's improving. A pat on the back is really important to a one. They want to be acknowledged for what they're doing. And so if you're a one and you got, let's say an 8 leading you, you're probably not going to get that pat on the back and that sort of thing. But if you understand the 8, you know why that's happening. And so it won't concern you too much. So on the don't side, never criticize a one in public because again, they're so hard on themselves. It just makes it 10 times worse as they beat themselves up on the other side. They find it really difficult to build things from scratch. So if you put them in front of a typewriter and say, write the next novel, they will get locked up in that and they won't be able to do that. The other thing is don't let them redo other people's work. And the reason for that is it will demoralize the other people because they'll probably do it better. They will find everything wrong with it and they won't think about necessarily the feelings of the other person while they're doing it necessarily. They connect to other people, but a lot of times in their doing, it's not always a first thought. around that. Because remember, they're action oriented. They live in that action center of intelligence. Be careful of conveying language of right and wrong, because you kind of speak right into their wheelhouse and feed that. And then don't be surprised if frustration or anger erupts, because it does happen sometimes out of that sense of righteousness and some of those things, typically with the unhealthy folks on there. So with that, I will just say, are there any questions that need to be answered? And I'm just going to look at this real quick and see if anything comes up. Okay, I will continue just to make sure we're going to get done on time. So the next one is the 2. Okay, and the 2 is called the helper. And again, 2, they can either have a 1 wing or a 3 wing. When they relax, they go to a 4, and when they're stressed, they go to an 8. And we'll talk about what that is. And hopefully, if you're one of these, as you've taken the test, this will explain a little bit to you as we go through. So let's just do an overview of the 2. So the helper, they're warm, giving, people-centered, sacrificing, and praising. They're inclusive, they're empathic, they're lovers, right? They care deeply about other people. They live in that relationship space, right? So this is your first person that goes into the feeling center, okay? And so when they're healthy, they offer humility to themselves and the world around them. They're generous. They value those relationships, supportive and able to practice self-care. And self-care is the key to a 2. Unhealthy 2s do not take care of themselves. They take care of everybody else at the risk of sacrificing themselves. And so a lot of folks that we see that were very giving and conscientious and didn't practice self-care, finding rest, meditating, praying, whatever it is, taking walks. If they don't do that sort of thing, then what they do is they start to just lose their identity in other people. And in doing so, they don't see themselves as worthy. And so they go into that unhealthy place. And so they can become flattering and manipulative as they sort of give to get. And they're motivated by a deep belief that they don't deserve to be loved for who they are. And this is where you see some addictions and things happen in 2s as well around that. I've got a person in my life who was a very giving person. She's done a ton for other people and sort of lost herself in the midst of this. And of course, I didn't know the Enneagram at the time. And now she is unfortunately addicted to drugs and really having a hard time getting out of that because of the neglect to herself. So, but 2s make healthy 2s make really great salespeople. They make great event planners and coordinators because hospitality is at the top of their list. They're really good at creating environments where people connect, and they make sure everyone's included. If they are sitting at a party and there's somebody off by themselves, not talking to anyone, they will be the one who goes over and grabs them and brings them into the fold. That's how 2s operate. And we got quite a few 2s at Seek, and all our salespeople are 2s, which is really interesting. A couple do's here. Place them in positions where there's a lot of people contact. They need to be around people. They're extroverts. They love that. Appreciate, applause, and affirm. Do a lot of work. And if you don't do the rest, just affirm, affirm, affirm. We could say that too. And put feedback within an affirm sandwich, right? So it's affirm, give them the feedback if it's tough or whatever, and then affirm them again, right? This is really important to them in terms of how they receive and give feedback. Positive, friendly, and optimistic. Remind them that what they're doing matters, because they need to connect what they do to a purpose. That's the emotional side. That's that driven, let's go after it. Be aware of them turning the conversation around and focusing on you. They're very good at deflecting and making it all about you versus them. And so you almost have to call it out very directly and say, hey, this isn't about me, this is about you, especially when you're giving compliments, which is interesting. Here's some things not to do. Don't take advantage of them. They won't put up with it for long. They may let you get away with a little bit for the sake of peace. However, they won't put up with it for long, and eventually it'll come out. Don't embarrass them in front of others. Don't give feedback in front of other people. They don't do well with that because, again, that worth is tied to that acceptance. Don't let them deflect or distract you. Talked about that already. And then don't over detail things. They typically have high emotional intelligence. They'll hear what you're saying without too many specifics going into that. So if you are a 2, the kind of work that brings you life is connected to people in a lot of different ways, creating those spaces, creating those environments, and including other people, serving other people, making sure other people are taken care of. But the kryptonite is you have to take care of yourself at the same time. So any questions on that one? There's that little Q&A button at the top. If you guys want to ask a question, you can click on that, and it will allow us to see some of your questions. I'll just give it a minute here. And if some of those come up, I'll keep my eye on it and make sure that I'm not missing anything. Let's see if we got anything here. Okay. All right. Okay. So let's go on to the next one. We'll keep running. Let's talk about the 3. Their core is a 3. Their wing is a 2 or a 4. And relaxed, they go to a 6. Stressed, they go to a 9. So they live on that 3, 6, 9 triad is what's called there. And so just an overview of these guys. This is the achiever. Okay, this is what I was talking about earlier, the company that purchased us. It's primarily a 3 culture from the top all the way down. And it's very numbers oriented, very, very driven, very efficient, very well run. Lots of systems and processes that are necessary, and a lot of elimination of processes and systems that aren't. The 3 is called the achiever. Okay, so if you are personifying this, they're ambitious, efficient, adaptable, driven, competitive. Competitive is a big one there. They're driven to win. They want to win. Results oriented, they're a doer, and they're image conscious. Okay, so they care how they look, they care how they show up. That matters. And so all of those are factors in the overview of the 3. When they're healthy, highly flexible and willing to adapt to achieve their goals. They're hardworking, principled, and receptive, offering the gift of hope and integrity to the world. So they run really well within the context of let's make things better. Let's win. Let's make sure we get there. You've probably seen some of these folks who are unhealthy as well. They put too much emphasis on what they do or accomplish than who they are. And so this is where you see workaholism. They can tend to be chameleons, which makes them come across as insensitive and manipulative, right? So they just show up as different people in different settings and things like that when they're unhealthy, because they've sort of lost their identity to the work and to the accomplishments and to the win and to the trophies and et cetera. These are folks that put a lot of stuff on Facebook and Instagram, right? To say, look where I am. I'm in, I'm in Denver in the mountains, or I'm, swimming with the dolphins and wherever, because they want to make sure everybody knows. This is the image conscious part. They're making sure everybody knows where they've been, what they're doing, and that they're out there living it up. So you'll see that a lot with 3s in terms of their behavior. So a couple do's, give them a scorecard. These guys are driven by the metrics. So it's really important that we give them the metrics to go after. So make it really clear and incentivize them with a clear reward system. So give clear objectives, goals, action steps, and measurements. So a lot of times when, working with 3s, we get straight to the point. We use bullet points with these guys versus using paragraphs and stories, right? Because they're so efficient, they don't always want to hear the story. They just want to get to the numbers or get to the point. And so if you're married to a 3, which is really interesting, a lot of the times they'll be saying things like, hey, don't start with a story. I don't need to hear that. Just tell me what's going on with all this. Okay. Clear bonuses, promotions, promises of advancement, those things all matter and are all motivators to a type 3. And then they put others around them who can keep them from becoming, put others around that will sort of hold them accountable and keep them from being manipulative, who aren't afraid to call them out and say, hey, don't act like that. On the other side, on the don't side, don't let them cut corners or take shortcuts. They tend to do that. And if they're doing that, then they sort of subvert the system. Don't let them be inauthentic. Don't feed bad behaviors. Don't let them run over coworkers, because they'll tend to do that in the quest to win. don't let them ignore details, and don't let them go unchecked, because a lot of times if they're untethered, um, they start to develop some of those efficiencies that aren't always healthy for the bottom line or for the company or for the relationships. So don't let them redline too long and get out of balance. I think it's important as well, because they will get out of balance, because they'll be the ones with their computers on their lap until midnight every night, trying to achieve and outdo everybody else. So if you are in a 3 culture, or you're working with 3s or whatever, there's a lot, they get a lot of things done, and they're very efficient about how they get it done. So we can learn a lot about how to get the work done. And at the same time, they tend to be usually in leadership positions, right? Because they, a lot of CEOs are 3s, 8s, and 7s. You'll see 3s, 8s, and 7s become CEOs quite a bit for different reasons, but this is one. Okay, any questions on these guys? All right, move on to the 4. 4 is my favorite on the Enneagram. I always like to say that, because I just think they're so unique and different and weird in a good way, and just there's so much good here. So core is a 4. Their wings are a 3 or a 5. Resourceful, when they're relaxed, they go to a 2. When they're stressed, they go to a 1. And by the way, guys, all that means is, for example, if a 4 is stressed and they go to a 1, that just means if they find themselves cleaning out sock drawers and decluttering the space around them, there's probably a good chance there's a little bit of stress going on there. Because that's what 1s do. They declutter, they clean things up, they make them better, easier to focus, etc. So that's what that means. And when they're relaxed, they go to 2, which is that caring, giving person that we talked about back there. So that's what that relaxed and stress line means. So a couple of things of the 4, they're called the originalist, romantic, empathic. These folks color the world. These are the folks who give life and breath to creativity. These are your artists, painters, poets, writers, actors, actresses, etc. They're purpose-driven, they're inspired, they're very sensitive, they're very in touch with their feelings, they're courageous, expressive, and artistic. So their motivation is they need to express their uniqueness and authenticity and go deep with others. So they need the connection. Remember, they live on this this feelings triad as well, right? And so they want the deeper connection with people along that line. When they're healthy, they appreciate beauty and create meaning a lot of times. They're innovative, they're sensitive, they're able to articulate things that other people can't articulate, bring imagination to everything. They're also very big on making sure everybody feels equal and, authenticity to themselves in the world. They bring that. This idea, they'll actually use their creativity to fight for those that are maybe being marginalized, etc. And they're not afraid of quiet. They love the quiet space, the reflection, time to go into that. When they're unhealthy, they feel misunderstood. No one gets me. They live in melancholy at times, which can lead to depression because they're so in touch with their feelings and other people's feelings. They'll tend to take on the feelings of the people around them. They're the most empathic on the Enneagram. And so they naturally connect at an empathic level with the people around them, whether they're listening to people or they're just, rubbing elbows with them in proximity. They can feel what other people feel. And they have an acute awareness of their wounds and flaws as they go through that. So the unhealthy part comes if they stay in melancholy too long, it can lead to depression in some of these other spaces. So just a real quick story on a 4. My daughter's a 4. And so one of the things she does for me is she'll actually stop me because I'm a 7 and I tend to run from pain. And so if I want to move on from something, she's really good at grabbing my shoulders, looking me in the eye and say, hey, maybe we need to stop and feel this before you run out. And always interesting and convicting when your daughter pulls you aside and says something like that to you because she's right. So they're very good. They don't mind being in situations where there is pain because they're used to living in that. They tend to, be a tortured soul at times. And so pain is not foreign to them. And so they exist and they breathe and they operate pretty regular and readily in that. So a couple do's. Let them find the common ground between people and express their creativity and their distinct style. One thing about a 4 is if you say, hey, you're a 4, they're like, don't lump me in with everybody else, right? That's part of it. Uniqueness is really important to them. Listen and work to understand what they're saying. Hear their ideas and acknowledge those ideas. And here's the thing. They don't really care if you do their idea or not. They just want to make sure you heard it and you acknowledge it. That's what it comes down to. Balance their mood and melancholy. So if you see them sort of staying in that space too long, well, I'll get to something on the don't side around this, but make sure you're paying attention to them and caring for them, and coming in and doing a lot more listening, because a lot of times just climbing in the hole with them will allow them to come out with you. Utilize their gift for language. They tend to be able to articulate things a lot of people can't. And so they make great copywriters at times if they have that gift. Balance their emotional depth with critical thinking. So they'll spend a lot of time in the emotional depth, and you need to call out the critical thinking. They're able to do it, and they're very good at it once you call it out, but they default to the emotional side. And then look for opportunities to make tasks relevant and meaningful. The more purpose you can tie to something you've asked them to do, the more they're going to engage. A couple of things on don't minimize their feelings or tell them to cheer up. This is where you can't go, hey, you're melancholy too long, get out. You can't do that. You actually have to go sit with them and listen, and almost get in the hole with them before they'll climb up with you. Don't ignore conversations that are personal and intimate. Don't rush them along. And also don't let the empathic level of communication stop the conversation and bring it to a halt. It's important you keep the identity of who you are and keep moving that forward. Don't cut them off in conversations of purpose and efficiency, for purposes of efficiency. So if you're a 3 trying to lead a 4, 4s can really frustrate you because they want to sit and tell stories and talk about feelings. And 3s are like, nope, get to the point. I'm driven. The emotion is driving me. It's a little bit different. So questions on the 4? All right, let's keep going. So 5. Love 5s too. 5s are heavily introverted. So core with a 5, wing 4, 6, relax, they go to 7, stress, they go to 8. We'll talk about those things. So the overview of the 5. So they're often called the sage, the wise one, right? They're perceptive, curious, they're unsentimental. So they can be a little bit detached at times. They're self-sufficient. They live in that thinking triad. So we just entered a thinking triad with the 5. And so the primary emotion that drives the 5, 6, and 7 is fear. How they react to it is really interesting. So they're inventive, objective, they're independent, they're private. They can be very analytical, but they're also really strong pioneers because they tend to create a lot of things in their autonomy and their isolation. So these are folks that go into garages and create things and then come out on the other side with something amazing that they were able to create because they had some goal in mind when they went into the cave or the garage, right? But don't stereotype them into, the guys from Big Bang Theory or anything like that. They don't all have thick rim glasses and pens in their front shirt pocket, right? These are folks who are, again, they just love to learn. They're driven by autonomy and the need to know and understand the world, not so that they can go and teach other people or let it pour forth, all this knowledge somewhere else. They just want to know because that's what gives them a sense of how they deal with some of the fear that drives the thinking, the thinking center of intelligence. And so when they're healthy, they can become really strong visionaries and very mindful of everything that's going on. They offer non-attachment to themselves and to others. They can be scholars. So they tend to be really, really smart. But the thing about it is you're not going to motivate them with money. You're not going to motivate them with hardware. You're not going to motivate them with pats on the back. The way you motivate these guys is you give them autonomy. You give them an assignment and send them off and see what happens. So when they're unhealthy, they can come across as aloof, stingy, arrogant, intellectually arrogant, disconnected from their heart, retreating into their mind to avoid being engulfed or intruded on. So they become hermits, where they don't want to talk to anybody or be around anybody. But if they're unhealthy, it's sort of done in a not very pleasant way. So couple things around do's for them: offer them autonomy in their work. Again, give them agency to control their environment. So leave them alone. Just let them go. Give them an assignment and a deadline, and leave them alone. And they will come out with something brilliant when the time comes for that deadline to hit. They hate meetings. They tend to not like being in meetings and around too many people, especially if meetings don't have any purpose to them. So give them feedback privately. Be clear and upfront about the time required. So tell them what they're in for. If they're going into a meeting or going to be around for a project or whatever, be clear around the parameters so they know what's expected. Give them time to reflect before you follow up. They're not great in the moment of responding, but if you give them time to reflect, they'll actually come back with something brilliant. And be clear about reasoning, why you're asking for it. Because if they understand the why, then they can get behind it. The don'ts is don't put them in an open workspace environment. Oh my gosh, that's death to them because of all the distraction and all the communication and all the things that they really don't want to be bothered with. Don't waste your time incentivizing with money or promotion. Ask them to give. Do not ask them to give a presentation spontaneously. So hey, can you get up and talk about this today? They don't do well in those environments. Don't make them attend too many meetings, and please don't be vague with them. The more clear and concise you can be with them, the better off they are with you. So questions on the 5? All right. And we'll have a little bit of time at the end as well. I hope to get to the rest of these. So to get to questions at the end. So let's talk about the 6. I love the 6. Actually, I love all these types, so I should probably stop saying that. But their core is a 6. Their wing is a 5 or a 7. When they're relaxed, they go to a 9. When they're stressed, they go to a 3. You already know what the 3 is, so you can do the math there. But an overview of them, they're called the loyalist. And it's interesting. You're going to hear some words: devotion, courage, preparedness, competence, trustworthiness, team-oriented, scenario planners. The best way I can describe a 6 is a word that I found that is probably not a popular word, but it's something that helps me understand what a 6 is. It's called the consigliere. And a consigliere is somebody who was hired usually by a mob boss, like the Godfather, who would stand behind them in their Italian restaurant as people are coming in to do business with them. And they usually have their arms folded. They would tend to be Irish, by the way, because you couldn't trust somebody in the Italian family to do it for you. So and they were paid. And so this would be usually a big, burly, bald Irish guy that would stand behind the mob boss and then look at everybody coming in and all the and plan for every scenario that could go wrong, right? They're motivated by security and belonging, driven by a need to be safe and prepared. That consigliere will know every situation that could possibly happen and have a solution for it before it ever happens. And 99 out of 100 scenarios won't happen. But when that one does, they'll be ready because they're ready for it. They are great to have next to a CEO, a founder, a startup, et cetera, because they're the ones who are sort of the giraffe at the watering hole, making sure that when the lion's on its way, that all the other animals take off from the watering hole and are taken care of. So when they're healthy, they're courageous and connected to a sense of inner knowing. Offering the gift of devotion and trust to themselves and others. And so they're committed. They become the most loyal on the Enneagram. I have a 6 that works at Seek, and he's been with me for 14 years, standing right next to me. And he is never wavered in his commitment or devotion to the things that we do there, or to me. When they're unhealthy, they are nervous Nellies. They worry excessively. They fear letting down their defenses. They become anxious, suspicious of everybody, paranoid, doubting. They tend to question everyone's competence. They just really become a force for not good in your company if they're unhealthy, if they're at that lowest level of integration. So a few do's with them. They make a great second for 3s, 7s, and 8s who tend to be CEOs or leaders or what have you. Allow them to question you through all the scenarios and what their role will be, because by doing so, you're acknowledging that you're hearing them. And when they send up the flare, you want to make sure that you've acknowledged them. Let them forge strong alliances where they'll feel safe and secure, and listen to them. Don't dismiss what they're saying. Listen to them. They see things that you don't see. I promise you, they'll see a lot of things you don't see. The 6 that works at Seek is very clear to say, hey, I see something coming. You need to adjust for this. Let them be that consigliere to your bosshood, okay? Be careful with direct reports to them. Treat them fairly and deliver on your promises. It's really important to them that you deliver what you commit to. Don't be vague. Don't ignore them when they point out flaws in the plan. That's what they're wired for, to look and see what's wrong. Don't minimize their feelings or concerns. In other words, don't shoo them away when they start giving you thoughts, or they just won't give them to you anymore, and you'll be in a world of hurt. Don't let them fall into analysis paralysis where they can't make a decision. And that happens often with 6s. They don't like to make the tough decisions. That's why they're great seconds and maybe not always great firsts. Doesn't mean they can't be a first. It just means that they typically, their default doesn't lean them that way. And then don't underestimate their gift of seeing things way before they happen, which I was talking about earlier. Questions about the 6? Okay. Hopefully this is all making sense. The tough thing about webinars is I can never read anybody's faces, and I do that a lot when I present live. So hopefully you guys are all hanging in there with me. So we're getting there. We got 3 more to go. So let's get to the 7. This is what I am. So the 7 at the core, my wing is an 8, but you can be a 6 or an 8 wing. You can imagine a 7 with a 6 wing is a little bit more conservative and paying attention to things. So a 7 with an 8 wing tends to be a little bit more driven and direct and grounded with that. And then relaxed, we go to a 5, and stress, we go to a 1. And as I mentioned earlier, if I find myself cleaning out my sock drawers and creating clutter, it's a good self-awareness tool for me to go, hey, you're a little stressed out right now. You might need some self-care time to take care of some of this and get out of this. So it's a big part of it. So overview of the 7. Call the enthusiast. These are the people you want greeting you every morning in the office. They tend to be optimistic, flexible, future-oriented. They can be practical, adventurous. They're looking for freedom, fun, and they're spontaneous visionaries. And so these are folks that can fill up 3 walls, 4 walls in a room with Post-its. No problem coming up with ideas and seeing what the future might look like. Their motivation is fun. So they're always about the experience. They want to experience life to the fullest and avoid pain. And a lot of times that desire to experience everything leaves them in that, sort of place of, never satisfied. They're insatiable for that sort of thing. When they're healthy, they're content, they're serene, they're able to embrace sobriety and are fully present with themselves and the world. Innovation and vision comes naturally to them when they're healthy. When they're not healthy, you can see they're like a train wreck. So when that low level of integration, they're impulsive, they're uncommitted, they're gluttons, they're distracted, they're unfocused. They're never satisfied by their insatiable search for the fulfillment and fear of missing out, right? So they're always afraid of missing out. They have major FOMO if they're not healthy. The do's with them, give them a long leash, give them freedom. If you try to tie a 7 down and control them or micromanage them, they won't stick around. They'll take off. Give them varied job description. So what I mean by that is give them a lot of different options and a lot of variety in their jobs. Keep them focused, but put guardrails around them, but don't squeeze the guardrails so tight that it's a 1-lane highway. Give them 5, 6, 10 lanes to go on. Again, options, opportunities to innovate. Think startup. They're very entrepreneurial, and put a 6 next to them. Having a 6 next to them keeps them grounded and make sure they don't go off the rails. Encourage them to pause, feel, and think about what's currently happening, especially if they're going through something that's somewhat painful or rough. A couple of things to not do: don't limit possibilities for them. I used to work in a lab at Procter & Gamble, and I remember just being miserable because all I did was work with chemicals all day making laundry detergent. And I just didn't see any possibility of innovating or doing anything to liven up that position. And it was really, really hard. So quickly ran out and got with people. So don't let them cover over big problems. So a lot of the times, because they're optimists, they'll reframe everything and move it to another place and act like it didn't happen. Don't let them run away from problems or dismiss dark feelings. This is what I was talking about with my daughter, who's a 4. She'll stop me and say, hey, let's sit and feel this before you move on. Don't let them pull rank, even if, or don't pull rank on them, even if you're the manager. So don't play the position card. 7s don't care about position. They don't care about titles, any of that stuff. What they care about is the experience. So you can make them the lowest level title you want. They won't care about that. What'll really matter to them is the experience going to be awesome? Am I going to learn? Am I going to grow? Am I going to continue to move forward? Those are the important things. If their learning curve gets flat and there's no variety, they'll leave. Don't give them one solution. Involve them in the conversation and allow them to participate in the solution, because they will come up with 50 different ways you can skin the cat with that. Questions on the, questions on the 7? Anything there? Okay. I'm hoping you guys are still here. I can't tell. So we'll keep going. All right, here we go. 8s. So 8s, a lot of fun. They're 8 at the core, 7 wing or a 9 wing. Again, we've talked about the 7 already. We'll talk about the 9 here in a minute. Relaxed, they go to 2. Stressed, they go to 5. These are the lions. Okay, and the way to think about them is the sort of the alpha dogs, or whatever you want to call them. They're the leaders. A lot of CEOs tend to be 8s. Jack Welch would be an 8. It's a great example of what an 8 looks like. Very, very strong leaders going through. So an overview of the 8. The challenger. They are, and they're called the challenger because they're assertive, they're decisive, they're protective, they're independent, they're influential. They like to be in control. They're big-hearted under the tough exterior. And a lot of times you can't see it because of the tough exterior. So when they're assertive and protective and influential and control in control at times, you can't always see that underneath they're kind of mushy, right? They love challenges and justice. They love direct communication. So being direct with an 8. So a lot of times I have, people say, how do you work with an 8? How do you do that? Well, direct communication, they appreciate that. They love it. They don't want to be coddled in any way when it comes to communication. Don't dance around things. Just let them know. Their motivation's power. They want to be strong and they want to avoid showing vulnerability. And here's what I'll tell you about an 8. An 8 who is vulnerable, who shows their vulnerability in a setting, people are drawn to them. They love being around 8s who are strong and influential and assertive, as long as they know that they're vulnerable, right? Because that makes them human. And so when they're healthy, they can be strong, deeply caring, and approachable. They offer the gift of innocence to themselves and the world when aligned with reality. And so when they're fully aware, and by the way, 8s are in general are the type that lacks self-awareness the most. And so they need to do a lot of work. But the minute you create vulnerability or you allow them to be vulnerable, they all of a sudden become very human and very healthy in a hurry. When they're unhealthy, and I'm sure you've met some unhealthy 8s, they're domineering, they're aggressive, they're lustful, they're larger than life in the threatening world. And so they tend to, again, just grab a hold of everything that they can to get their bearings and assert themselves into whatever situation is going on. They have problems delegating naturally. So they don't like to delegate. They'll sort of, go do things on their own, but they get a lot of stuff done. And when they're healthy, they learn how to delegate really well. It becomes a big trait of theirs. And so they tend to delegate a lot of things. There's another side to it. If they're unhealthy, they could delegate everything. And, just because somebody told them to or what have you. And so you got to be careful for the right element of delegation. Here's some do's with them. Be direct in your communication. Set limits and boundaries and be straightforward, because they like to test authority. They don't like the status quo, and they will always test you to make sure that everything's in order and that they're still in charge. Commit to a course of action and they'll follow you. So if you're committed to it and you're going to put your head down and run through it, they'll run through it with you. Make sure they think through things before making decisions. I always tell people in our company, if they're dealing with an 8, to give their suggestion or their idea, their question to an 8, and then ask them or tell them, I don't want an answer right now. Give me an answer tomorrow after you have a chance to sleep on it. Because what I've found is 8s who have time to process make great decisions, great decisions. 8s who try and make decisions in the moment tend to not make great decisions because it's a bit reactive. And again, remember, we're back up in the action center. And so we're starting to see that come out. A couple of don'ts. Don't betray their trust. Don't beat around the bush in your communication. Don't waffle or be indecisive, or they'll see you as incompetent. Don't be weak. Don't change plans midstream. The more you waffle, the harder time they'll have with you as a leader, and they may even write you off if they're unhealthy. Don't let them take action too quickly, and then don't let them move without consultation. So a lot of times 8s will put people around them like a 2 or a 9 or a 7 that will sort of keep them in check and make sure they're not moving too quick without thinking fully through what's going on. 6s are good for them as well. Okay, oh, I see some questions up here. This is good. Let me just get to this. Okay. Thanks, Lane. You mentioned that 5, 6, 7 operate out of fear. What do the 2, 3, and 4 and 8, 9, and 1 operate out of? That's a great question. So there's a primary emotion that drives all of these. The 5, 6, and 7 obviously is fear. The 2, 3, and 4 is sadness. Okay, remember, they're in the emotional place, and so their sadness is a thing that enters in, and they all react to it differently, right? So, but sadness is that thing that's present with all of them. And then the 8, 9, and 1, their primary emotion is anger. Okay, and so those are the threats. Those are the threats that come in there towards that. So, okay, hopefully that's helpful. So those 3 emotions are really big in those centers. So again, the head center. That 5, 6, 7 is fear. The heart center, the 2, 3, 4 is sadness, and the height center is, the action center is 8, 9, and 1 out of that. Okay. Thanks for those questions, guys. Okay. All right, let's keep going. We're almost there. Let's see what happens here. Okay, so let's go to the 9. So the 9 sits at the top of the Enneagram, and I think that's purposeful because they relate really well to everybody on the Enneagram. They're able to see all the other types and connect the dots with all those people. They're amazing, amazing people. They're adaptive. They make great domestic partners. And so they have an 8 wing or a 1 wing. When they are relaxed, they go to a 3. When they're stressed, they go to a 6. And here's an overview of the 9. They're called the peacemaker, right? Because they deal with conflict. They don't like conflict, and if it does arise, they'll typically if they're healthy, they'll take action against it, and make the people who are in disagreement sit down. They're agreeable, they're understanding, they're patient, they're supportive, they're laid back, they're genuine, very adaptable, they're authentic, they're real, and they prefer to avoid conflict, by whatever means necessary. And remember, anger is that emotion up there. So when you start to think about anger coming in, their thing is, I'm just going to withdraw from that because I don't want to deal with it. Unless it starts to affect their life, then they'll address it. Their motivation is to be settled and in harmony with the world. So they're harmonizers, so to speak. A good way to talk about them. So when they're healthy, they're extremely self-aware, they're vibrant. They provide the gift of right and sustainable action to themselves in the world. So they tend to operate and just be good. They're really good people. And the thing I will say about them too is when I mention they're adaptable, I often say they make great domestic partners because they just tend to go with the flow around things. And so when you're working, with a 9, and you might put them in the middle of a war zone in Beirut and say, we're going to raise our family here. And they'd be like, yeah, we can make this work. That's how adaptable they are with things. When they're unhealthy, they tend to procrastinate. They're stubborn. They can be self-denying. They sort of ignore their needs and don't take care of themselves. Very similar, sort of, to a 2. They're going along to get along with others will lead to outbursts. So in other words, if you take advantage of them, they will eventually crack. And it won't just be a sadness, or it will be that anger that we talked about. they will just explode. And so that'll lead to outbursts when this strategy of going along to get along doesn't work. And so a couple do's with them, press into them and get their personal perspective and point of view. It's really important that they're really wise. And so, but a lot of times they don't assert themselves in a conversation. So press into them to pull that out of them and say, what do you see here? What advice do you have for us here? Give them time to think and reflect, very similar to the eights. They're better at making decisions when they've had time to think. So show them how their selflessness is affecting the success of other people. And when I say selflessness, that's a healthy version of selflessness, meaning that, they're sort of giving up some of themselves in order to affect and cause change, sort of that anonymity in some ways. Let them help reconcile differences in the marketplace. So if there is conflict in your organization, or if you run a company that handles a lot of customer complaints and things like that, nines are great in those settings because they're really good at bringing people to the table and seeing all aspects of and seeing all sides of everything that's going on, and drawing people to the table to have a discussion. They're great mediators and people who reconcile differences. And then tap into their ability to see everybody's perspective and make deals. They tend to be really good negotiators because they're not going to lock on with one. They're going to be somewhat unbiased through that whole thing. A couple don'ts. Don't let them default to groupthink because, again, they won't speak up. Don't let them avoid conflict. Don't let them get too far away from that because we need their skills to manage conflict. Don't let them be passive aggressive. They can be that way if they're unhealthy. And that's that whole going along to get along, but they'll sort of throw grenades over the wall when they're not a part of inside the walls. Don't let them sell themselves short, and don't let them get lazy or procrastinate. A lot of times they can be misunderstood as lazy because they're so laid back at times that they come across that way. So, all right. That is it. So if you have questions, here's your chance to jump in. Just throw those in the Q&A section. I think we have about 3 minutes left. I know that was like drinking out of a fire hose, but that'll at least give you a good overview on how these pertain to business. I would say I've used this exhaustingly at Seek, and it has made a world of difference in terms of understanding who our team is and how we move forward. So Q&A, questions. All right. I'm not sure how we got through all that, but somehow we did. I'm assuming you guys have a good understanding of all this. A couple acknowledgments, just really quick at the end of this, and feel free to keep typing Q&A if you have some in there, guys. But the 5 Capitals coaching group, Brandon Schaefer's, was just monumental in helping me understand this and play it into my own life, into my marriage, into my raising of my kids, into my business. All aspects of life going in, my relationship with extended family, friends, etc. And it's just been a great tool for self-awareness and to make the world go around better. Same thing for Krista Kennedy at Culture Conscious. Look her up on LinkedIn. She's amazing, and she does this in depth with people as well with hers. And then the entire Seek company. I just, so grateful for those guys going through all this. So see a couple of Q&As up there. So let's see what we got. Not only do I want to know the type of all my coworkers now, but I want to have my wife taken as well. Fascinating and so helpful. Awesome. Yeah, this works everywhere. So because it's based in the human condition. So it's really starting with people first. Yes, Carrie, we did record the session, and so it will be available. I think it will be sent out via Danielle will be sending it out afterwards. And then just a couple of follow-ups for you guys. We will be reaching, I think, Corey and probably some of the coaches from 5 Capitals will be reaching out. If you want to go more in depth on your Enneagram and understand more about you, they're happy to do that. We do a little 20-minute sort of taster for that is what I understand. So I know Corey and the team will be doing some of those as we go through. So thank you, guys. This is fantastic. Any other questions? I think, let's make sure I've got them all up here. Okay. All right. I think we're in good shape, guys. So I won't take more of your time. Thanks for joining. Thanks for being a part of this. Really grateful for everybody being here. And if you have questions, save those for when you get that phone call from Corey and the other coaches. And hopefully this will start you on a course towards some really meaningful, success and movement in your business as well as in your personal life. Take care.